Hey there, night travelers. Where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? If you like stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't drift past the next one. I've made a living out of telling the kind of tales people lean in for, the ones that unspool slowly, like a rope paying out into black water. This one started on a ship that didn't advertise itself as haunted. It was all polished brass, sunrise buffets, piano standards at dusk, a smiling crew in pressed whites and cheap champagne popping like bubble wrap in the atrium. They called her the Arcadia Blue. She had a casino that smelled faintly of lemon, cleaner and coins, and an interior corridor the crew called I-95, a straight shot from bow to stern where real life rattled the china. I was hired to fill the late nights with words. We were days from land, the itinerary a long blue smear. Miami to the Azores to Lisbon. At noon there were trivia contests and line dances. After midnight there was only the sea, a endless, unlit thing pressing against the windows, the horizon gone like a blown fuse. That's when the ship's personality steps out of its uniform. That's when you notice how the deck lights make halos in the mist, and how the hull's hum keeps your bones honest. It is a sound that says you are safe as long as it goes on. On. The third night, just before my set in the lounge, the hum died. Not a fade, a cut. The sound dropped out of the world as if someone pulled the needle from a record, and the ship took one long, polite breath. Glasses paused in midair. Slot machines sighed and blinked dumb as fish. The emergency lights slid on with a tender hospital glow. In that small silence, the sea spoke. You don't hear it until everything else shuts up. The black water slapping, like a hand against the hull from so far below it might be the planet's own heart. People did what people do. They laughed nervously, posted photos, waited for directions. The cruise director's voice came over the PA, cheerful but thin around the edges. A minor technical issue, a brief delay, complimentary sangria at the aft pool. The bartenders were quick, they knew their emergency. I was told to stall, keep the guests calm, tell a ghost story if I had one. I had a dozen, but the ship had one of its own ready to tell. In the crew corridor, on my way to the lounge, I saw the first thing. An arrow chalked in a careful hand above an access door pointing starboard, and beside it a letter. K. Nothing special, except there is no muster station K on any passenger deck plan I've ever seen. The letters are A through F, sometimes H if they have to get creative. Someone had pressed the chalk hard enough to score the paint. A white line caught the emergency light and glowed. I asked a housekeeper rolling a linen cart if she knew about K. She stopped long enough to look at the arrow, then at me. Her face held that flat, professional calm you learn when your whole world floats. She said, "No K," in a voice that wanted to be firmer than it was, and pushed on. The chalk line looked newer than the door, newer than the corridor, like it had been laid down just then along with the silence. I did my show. 40 minutes of a woman in a farmhouse hearing her dead husband whistle in the windbreak, and people laughed and drank and let the quiet be a backdrop. But even while I spoke, I felt the ship feel itself, like a dog checking the room for its owner. Out past the windows, the black ocean had no texture, just one long negative of the sky. When the applause came, it sounded wrong against the hush, too sharp like clapping in a church. On the way back to my cabin, I skipped the guest elevators and took the service stairs. Old habit. You learn more in the places where you're not expected. Between deck 12 and deck 14, there was an extra landing, a narrow triangle of metal grating that wasn't on the map. Ships avoid the number 13 for the same reason hotels. Why people prefer their fate pre-sweetened. But there it was, a nowhere space with a door marked with a strip of tape. The tape had a word on it in fading marker, Calypso. I knew enough to know the Arcadia Blue hadn't been born Arcadia. Ships live many lives, and like people, they don't always own the worst thing that ever happened to them. Somewhere under the new paint and old name slept. I put my ear to the door and heard, not voices exactly, but the slack hiss of an old recording. The PA on the Arcadia was digital. It chirped. This was tape. A woman's voice, smudged with static. All crew to boat stations. Repeat, all crew to boat stations. I opened the door. The hinges complained softly as if someone were being careful not to wake the room beyond. It was a service passage, plain steel and beige paint, but the signage was wrong. Old fonts, arrows that didn't match the map in my head. Somewhere, in the walls, a deck of cards was being riffled by a ghost, a soft burt that could have been air moving through dry ductwork. The passage led to a viewing room with darkened windows, polished metal rails, and rows of lounge chairs bolted to the deck, their straps crisp with disuse. There was a lifebuoy mounted high, the kind that names the ship in sure block letters. Airsea had been sanded to a fog. Calypso dawn ghosted through, the way old words come back when you paint over them in a hurry. The windows were black. Not night black. The ocean had that depthless velvet black that swallows your reflection and hands you back a version of yourself that looks tired and far away. In the glass, I saw movement behind me, the figure of a woman in a raincoat, her arm lifting, and when I turned, there was only a row of strapped chairs, buckles winking. The ship's PA clicked, and the same woman said calmly, "Now, muster K is starboard." I stood still, because there is a line you cross when you answer to the wrong name. All at once the hum came back, deep and reassuring, and with it the ship resumed breathing. The viewing room shivered, a tiny tremor, and the black ocean beyond. The glass went from absolute to merely nocturnal. I left quietly. Back in my cabin, a note waited under the door. It said in tidy hand, "You found it. Don't answer when it calls." The signature was a salt smear. I slept with the balcony latched and the curtains drawn that night. I make my living telling stories to people who think they don't believe in ghosts until the ocean reminds them. The company calls me enrichment, like a vitamin you take with your dessert coffee. On the Elysian Star, the nights were long, the crossings longer, and the water outside the lounge windows was a pane of absolute black. We were making an Atlantic repositioning, days without land. The passengers told themselves a ship is a floating city, safe as sidewalks. They forgot sidewalks end. They forgot the sea doesn't blink when you stare back. It never gets tired of waiting. The first strange thing happened on a night when the clocks were scheduled to go back. Ships do that quietly, a line in the program, a placard in the elevators. Please set your timepiece back 1 hour before retiring. You think you've been given a gift? 60 lazy minutes dropped like coins on your pillow. The crew has another name for it. They call it the dead hour because work stretches to fill it, because people wander in it, because sometimes something not accounted for gets up and walks around. That was the night I met the painter. On duty. He was in whites flecked with marine, gray, a rolling bucket beside him, a paint mask looped under his chin like a second mouth. He had the long, careful hands of someone who writes on steel with a brush. I found him on the promenade forward, where the wind bites and the lifeboats hang like sleeping whales. He was repainting the safety line that runs along the rail. "Don't step over," the line says. "Don't trust the dark." He glanced at me like he'd been waiting. "You do the stories," he said. "You should see the messages we cover. Nightly." He dipped his brush, made a neat box where the yellow had thinned, and leaned close. In the paint, under the fresh stripe, letters ghosted through the way old tattoos do when skin is new again. R-E-T-U-R-N, spaced like the person who wrote it had been jostled hard. "People write love notes out here," he said. "People confess. Sometimes they warn." I told him I'd seen plenty of warnings. He nodded toward the bow. "There's a studio up there. Nobody uses anymore. They booked a watercolor class once. Everyone complained the windows only showed black." I went up after midnight, after the late buffet had bled into yawns and sweatered couples had drifted to bed. The door was propped by a stack of canvas boards, edges curled with salt. They'd named it Vista Studio, though there wasn't much vista, just panes of glass facing the endless black. In the dim light, the room felt staged, chairs in tidy arcs, brushes in jars, paper laid out like blank receipts. On the chalkboard, someone had written, "Painting the horizon, 12 a.m., and then erased it badly. The word horizon lingered, a smudge you couldn't wipe clean. Ever. I stood by the windows, palms not quite touching the glass. Out there was nothing. That is not a poetic nothing. That is the absence of anything your eyes can bargain with. We were between weather systems, moon, new clouds like dropped curtains. A hum in the ceiling ticked over, and somebody's old playlist whispered awake from a forgotten speaker. A woman's voice instructing in the bright patience teachers use. "Find the horizon," she said. "Draw it straight. The trick is to trust the line." I laughed once because there wasn't one. Then the ship made me a liar suddenly. It began as a thready scrawl low and far, a patient thread of pale that shouldn't have been there on a moonless night. I know about plankton, the way the wake can kindle. This was not that. This was a child's ruler dragged across an erased slate. The voice said, "Good. Hold the line." A drawer in the nearest table had a nub of white chalk. I picked it up without thinking, an old performer's reflex to cooperate with the room. The board accepted my hand. The chalk whispered. My line doubled the one outside, like tracing a scar. Light. "Now add marks," she said. "Little anchors for your eye. People don't trust distance unless you give it a fence." I made ticks along my chalk horizon, tiny notches the way surveyors leave secrets on stones. The room cooled like a breath had passed over ice. In the glass, I saw myself, a tall, tired man making a child's map. Outside, the pale seam trembled, steadied. The ship creaked the way houses do when someone tests a stair. The word on the painter's line thumbed my shoulder from nowhere. "Return." I didn't. Not yet. I drew another careful notch anyway, at I. Each notch something answered, not loudly, I wouldn't sell you a bang. It was a sound like a fingertip thinking. The window pane bloomed a small oval of fog exactly where my chalk stop lay on the board behind me. One, then another, then three in a row as neat as attendance. The voice, softer now, said, "Hold them. Keep them level." The ship pitched, a kind of polite nod, and the pale line outside slid and returned. My chalk squeaked. The chairs pressed down, straps creaking like belts. Nobody sat. The room simply remembered the weight of sitting. I have announced lifeboat drills to rooms like this. I know the sing-song of instructions. This voice wasn't that, and yet the rhythm took me back to a different morning on a different contract. Orange vests and bored half smiles. "Count," she said. Her tone was classroom gentle. I counted the ovals, touching the glass lightly with my finger, which came away wet as if the ocean had breathed on it. 22. The outside line was wrong for a horizon. It sat too high, like the rim of a thing nearer than sky. The ship groaned, almost apologizing then. The door clicked and pushed inward. The painter stood there with his bucket and that second mouth under his chin, smelling faintly of solvent and night air. He didn't cross the threshold. Some rooms teach you their borders. "You see it," he said. I didn't answer, but my hand was shaking a little, chalk dust bright on my fingertips. "We don't paint in here," he said. "They made me once." The line came back by morning. He nodded at the board. "Don't write anything you want to keep. Don't say their names. If you can, ease them toward morning gently." I stayed, because I have learned that sometimes what a story needs from you is time. The clocks crept back. With a little triumph in the ship's newsletter, our hour stretched. The white notches misted and cleared, until the glass looked like it had been kissed and forgotten. Outside, the pale seam thinned until it was only the suggestion of a line, something your mind draws so you won't fall. I wiped the chalk off the board with my sleeve. "Thank you," the speaker whispered, and then there was only ventilation. I left before it started again. They put me on the Asteria for the long crossing, a trans-Pacific rake from Vancouver to Yokohama with no island stops, only sea. Nights, I'd tell stories in the small theater where the ceiling lights half glowed like coals, and afterward I'd walk the decks because the ocean replaces sleep if you let it. The blackout there was not lack but substance, a velvet that pressed to the glass and left an aftertaste of iron. The crew joked that in the middle there's no compass, just agreement. I believed them. The ship's hum kept everything like a prayer anyway. In my cabin there was a television the size of a tray. It ran ship channels on a loop, safety videos, spa offers, a camera aimed forward from the bridge that showed honest weather. At night, that feed was pure black, sometimes a smear of green plankton when the wake got excited. I left it on for company. You learn to like the thin sizzle of an empty signal. It says nothing is happening, which is its own comfort. On the fourth night, past 2 in the morning, a new channel appeared between 8 and 9. It named itself 0. The numbering was plain white on a black tile in the corner, as if the set had decided to invent a place for something that didn't fit the schedule. The picture was soft, like it had been breathed on. At first I thought it was the bow camera, but the angle was wrong. Too low and slightly off to one side. The sea looked close, shoulder close, black on black. The only light came from above, not ours. More sodium than LED, a sickle color. The frame trembled with motion that wasn't the ship I was on. It had another cadence. I turned the volume up. The speakers gave me wind, a low, steady push, and then a sound like rope fiber straining. Not unpleasant, not theatrical. If you've ever leaned against a boat in a swell and felt the line hum in your teeth, you know the tone. Metal knocked somewhere, a patient, repeating clank, and a voice came, not through the speakers exactly, but around them, as though the plastic learned a mouth. "Stand by," said the voice. "Hold the painter. No call sign. No origin." The words weren't orders so much as a habit that had kept speaking. I'm not a superstitious man, though I work close to superstition. I called the front desk to report a stray channel. The night manager patched me to a technician who yawned directly into my ear. He told me to unplug the set for 60 seconds and plug it back. "It's a matrix thing," he said. "Sometimes the entertainment server burps." I did as asked. When the screen woke, 0 came back with me, patient, like someone who'd left a finger in the door. The picture cleared a little. I saw a rail, thick with chipped paint, and canvas stowed above. The rail was numbered 7A in white stencil. On our ship, the lifeboats were numbered simple as kindergarten. Odd to starboard, even to port, no letters. I sat on the bed and watched the black move. It's a strange experience to watch a void approach you. The mind insists you're the one moving until some second sight corrects it. There was a shape in the dark like a mouth with no teeth. It opened and closed according to the swell. When it opened, there was a glimmer down deep, the way a fish shows when it turns in its sleep. I could have shut it off and gone back to the safety video. That would have been the healthy choice. Instead, I put on a jacket and stepped out onto my balcony. The night was a thick animal rubbing its hide on the hull. The ship's wake made a bruised trail, a little milk and tar. I leaned over the rail and saw nothing but my own shadow cast up by the cabin light. Still, in the white noise of wind, there was a textural difference, a pause every few seconds, like breath held. The set inside went on murmuring. In the morning, I found the technician on the crew deck by the theater, a thin woman with a coil of cable hung on her shoulder like a pet snake. Her badge said Karina. She listened, alert in that way some people get when their job brushes the uncanny more often than they admit. She asked what the overlay looked like, what numbers. I told her 7A. She nodded once, all business. "If it happens again," she said, "pull the power at the wall. Don't leave it on black. It can invite." She didn't explain what. She didn't have. To that night, 0 was there waiting as if it had been idling in the hallway for me to get home. The picture had advanced. The same rail, the same chipped paint. But now a hand in the corner of the frame, pale in the sodium light. Fingers closed on a line. Not dramatic. Just a hand doing what a hand does when a boat hangs breathing above black. Another voice joined. The wind. "Easy," he said, voice like gravel in a pocket. Ease. That word always makes me think of untying something you're not sure you want free, at all. I sat with the remote on my knee and my thumb over the power, bargaining with myself. I could watch until the hand let go. I could watch until the picture looped. The voice would stay matter of fact. There is a comfort in competence even when it is misplaced in time. Then something on the edge of the frame flashed, not light but a marker stripe on a hard hat. And the man turned his head just enough that I couldn't see his face while still being sure he wasn't any crew I knew. The line went slack. Black grinned. I didn't sleep. I unplugged the set and laid a towel over it like a shroud. The room felt better and worse. The next afternoon I saw Karina in coffee shop. Her cables gone, a paperback folded in one hand. I told her what I'd seen, not trying to sell it as more than it was. She sipped without sugar and said, "I've got a list." She showed me notes on her phone, a column of times. Channel 0 sightings, she said. Usually on crossings. Sometimes it's a bridge cam from wrong ship. Sometimes a tender crew never clocks out. On the last night before land, 0 came back at 3. The picture steadied, and for a second I saw, past the hand and rail into a glinting oval, a window reflecting a rectangle of light that could only have been a cabin like mine. The voice said, "Release," softly, like a bedtime instruction. I pulled the plug at the wall and went outside. Forward by our lifeboats, everything was quiet, straps snug, paint new. Still, on the starboard rail there was a smear of red where no red should be. The sea lifted, pretended nothing, and kept its counsel. They booked me on the Lyra Majestic for the long run west, a crossing that tilted from Honolulu toward the emptiness between maps, and then up for Alaska like the captain had been distracted and left a ruler on the chart. We had 19 nights, at sea in a row on the schedule, which is a way of saying the ocean had more votes than we did. My contract said enrichment, which is cruise ship for a person you put on a stage after dessert to talk about ghosts in a way that lets people feel safe being a little scared. I know how to do that. After 20 years, I also know the late hours when the ship takes inventory of everyone on board. In those hours, if the sea is truly black, the Lyra hummed with a sound that made me think of a heart settling into a sensible rhythm. It said we are moving. It said we are not alone. On our first dead calm night, the elevators glitched. That was how the front desk phrased it. Please be advised that our lifts are experiencing a minor issue. We apologize for any inconvenience. The signs went up next to the casino and outside the buffet doors where the hungry lingered like voters. No one thinks of lifts as important until they groan and stop between decks. I am a stairs man by habit. Crews use stairs because elevators talk back more than you want, often with mirrors and tiled numbers that say too much about time. But sometimes you let yourself be carried. Sometimes the ship offers an easy way and you agree because it has been a long night, because the ballroom singer has claimed your favorite stool at the aft bar, because the ocean outside looks like an unplugged television and you would like to be delivered by something that glides. I stepped into the aft bank on deck 7, the one that smells faintly of perfume and tortilla chips because you are equidistant from the boutique in the late night tacos. The car was empty. The mirror gave me back a tall man who needed a shave and a better excuse for being awake at 2:30. The panel showed the usual numbers: 3 for embarkation, 4 for dining, 5 for promenade, 9 for Lido. 13 was missing, because by the time you are out here, it is easier to humor the universe than argue with it. I pressed 9. The doors closed with a sigh as polite as linen. The car rose, a velvet tug behind the knees, and then the floor under me thought about it and stopped. There was no jolt, just a pause and a blink. The panel went dark and came back, the way eyes do when a flashlight tests them. The numbers cleared, themselves like a throat. Then a single letter appeared where a number should be. M. It was not painted on the panel. It was in the little red diode shapes every elevator uses to tell you what it is doing next. M. If the light had chosen any other letter, I would have thought of mezzanine, of Maine, of the people who name decks like wedding cakes. The Lyra is not a letter ship. The Lyra is a number ship, except for the way it is not. I hit door open because sometimes the answer is to choose sunlight, even if it is fluorescent. The doors parted. The hallway on the other side was not the one with the perfume and the tortilla chips. It was narrow and low, and painted a color you only choose when a man in a procurement office tells you the bid came in under. The floor was not carpet. It was rubber matting with coin stamps you see in places that expect to be hosed down. The air was cold and tasted of old coffee, industrial soap, and the deep iron penny smell you only get when water sits on steel for longer than it should. The ceiling was a run of fluorescence buzzing in a range only dogs should care about. The signs on the walls were wrong in a way that hit the body before the eyes caught up. Old fonts, arrows that leaned left when modern ones lean right, black letters on battered aluminum read, "Egress aft and holding." A printed placard in clear plastic, newer than everything else by decades, had been screwed onto the bulkhead over a set of double doors. It said, "Muster Station M All Assembly, Must. Report." The capital letters shouted like a headache. Ships do not have a Station M on this line. They have A through F, sometimes H if marketing gets fancy. Your key card tells you your letter. The drills on departure day include a diagram of where to stand if the world goes sideways. Passengers joke about learning to wear their life jackets without spilling their drinks. You can drown on a joke if a wave chooses it. I knew all of that. I also knew I had not been delivered to any place I had seen during the mandatory tour every contractor sits through. I stood half inside, my foot arresting the door's eagerness to close, and listened. There is a different voice ships use for emergencies. You know it because a suffix of authority enters it like salt. It says, "No one is hiding now." That voice came into that narrow hall as if someone down there had gone to the trouble to wire a public address into an intercom that only had one sentence. "Proceed to your assigned muster station," said a woman whose patience had been tried just to the point where you start using small words. "Proceed." The speakers popped softly like someone had opened a soda one room away. The hum of the lyra sat under it, steady and self-satisfied. A piece of paper on the floor against the baseboard moved minutely in a breeze I could not feel. I stepped out because sometimes good sense takes a back seat to curiosity in the same way a small dog lies down when a larger one enters a room. The floor had that gentle tack you get when salt dries and you wet it again. Every sound in there was amplified and close to the ear. There were no windows, only a feeling of the ocean's mass near. I turned right because every corridor gives you an impulse and you are never as free as you think. The double doors labeled egress had round windows clouded with age. The rubber bumpers beneath were nicked like old teeth. I looked through the nearest port and saw black. Not the black of night on a pool deck with a moon. Not the black of a power cut. Black that lives in one place, slightly moving, full of weight. The water was pressed right to the opening, skin to skin with the ship, rising and dropping with infinite gentleness. I could not see the horizon. The light out there came from nowhere I knew. It had the sodium color of things built when people still smoked at their desks. A row of life jackets hung on hooks opposite the doors. Not the modern ones with pleasing icons and bright LEDs. These were older, a stained mustard with cork that felt like old bread under my fingers. Each whistle was real cork, not plastic, and each was tied with cotton thread. On the far end of the row, a life jacket had been buckled hastily, strap twisted so the buckle lay wrong. Someone had written in marker on the shoulder, M starboard. The marker had bled and faded into a bruise of letters. The French word for whistle is sifflet. I know that because a long time ago a steward taught me the word and then used that same whistle to call me when I was running late for a show. I put my hand on one of the whistles and it squeaked when I pressed it, as if it remembered breath. You hear things that are not things in a place like that. A count soft and certain, not by ones, by tens. 110, 210, 310. The way a crewman in a drill talks under his breath while checking a line of vests that hold people you hope will never need them. I said hello because that is what my mother taught me to do when stepping over a threshold. The corridor did not answer. The ship made a small adjustment under my feet, the kind that sets the cutlery in the dining room to humming like tuning forks. The announcement came again. Proceed. Proceed now. I turned to go back. The elevator doors were still open, two shining teeth ready to bite closed. Inside, the panel had gone blank in a way that said I had a timed choice. You can't live in the wrong room forever. As I crossed the threshold, something brushed the back of my hand. Not cold, not warm. the sensation you get when someone stands close enough to share your air. I am not proud of the sound I made. It was small and private, and I kept it that way. The doors closed. The little jolt of restarting was more relief than I would admit. 9s and 10s rolled up as numbers should. When the doors opened on Lido, the frying oil smell and the green night glow of the pool lights reasserted the rules of this reality. 2 men in swimsuits argued about deck chairs as if nothing below them had shifted at all. In the morning, I found the chief housekeeper because the housekeeping department knows the ship more honestly than anyone else. She was a compact woman named Selvi with a radio on her hip and a braid down her back that said she handled both linen shortages and ghosts with the same expression. I told her I had got out at a place called M. She frowned without surprise. She said politely that crew corridors exist, passengers should not find. She said more quietly that sometimes the car stops there during crossings, and they have asked the techs to address it. She rubbed her thumb over her radio clip while she spoke, the way you do when you are thinking of what you can say without inviting anything to continue. I spent the day ignoring Deck 9. That is harder than it sounds. The ship is a grid, you learn. The place the elevator shouldn't go sat under where we live like a secret pocket sewn into your favorite coat. I told myself a mechanical story because those are sanity's allies. A relay, a bad board, an old panel from a prior build mislabeling a subdeck that had been sealed. The Lyra was not always the Lyra, you know. She had another name stamped under the paint, and before that she was a concept in a shipyard office. Name changes leave ghosts like perfume in a second-hand dress. That was my story, and it held until 2 in the morning when habit and boredom defeated caution. Habit told me to ride again. Boredom told me I might never see it twice if I wanted to. I pressed the button and waited with a man in a blazer carrying a tray of chicken wings. The elevator that came was empty and very patiently mine. Deck M arrived almost without announcement. The panel blinked. The letter rose. The doors parted on that same corridor, but there were differences, which is how you know you are not dreaming. The lights were dimmer, 2 bulbs sick and pink around the edges. The piece of paper by the baseboard had moved 1.5 feet and now sat askew like a fish that had given up pretending to be a leaf. The announcement did not play. In its absence, I heard the ship breathe and the sea make a noise I am still not sure was water. Someone had scuffed the rubber floor with a heel and a frantic question mark. I am not brave. I am a professional with obligations to curiosity. I stepped out and went to the round window in the egress door. The black outside was there, patient as an undertaker. The glimmer within it moved like something huge rolling under a blanket. In the glass, my reflection leaned in, eyelids tired and cautious. Behind that faint mirror, further back, a vertical shape passed quickly, as if a person wearing old life jacket foam and a rain slicker had just gone by with purpose. Do not picture a face. Faces are where you ruin stories with kindness or cruelty. Picture instead the absence that figures leave. The buckle strap on the wrong life jacket trembled once without help. The cork whistle turned a little on its cotton string, and a smell of wet rope became so clear I tasted it on my tongue. I did what any sane man would do. I spoke to the air the way you talk to a room before you leave someone sleeping in it. I said, "I'll count for you." I said it softly, because there were people above us trying to digest lobster. I counted by 10s, calm, like the voice I use when a child at a matinee edges toward tears and needs the man on the stage to protect them from the darkness they asked for. 110, 210, 3. The number settled the air the way a hand smooths a sheet. The ship responded in that unshowy way all good machinery does when you ask it to carry more weight. I counted to 20 and stopped. You do not promise more than you can keep. The whistle clicked against the hook once and then hung still. When I went back into the car, something small came with me, lodged in the tread of my shoe. In my cabin, under the desk lamp, I pried it out with the back of a pen. It was a crumb of cork, old dark as tea with a sliver of cotton thread stuck to it. It did not smell like anything. It sat in my palm and looked like an invitation. I put it in the drawer with the cruise schedule and the spare key card that never works. On the last night before we turned toward land, the daily newsletter said there would be a safety drill for crew after midnight. Passengers were asked to keep clear of stairs and crew doors. Around 2:30, alone on the promenade where the wind likes to find your ears and whisper unhelpful thoughts, I heard the ship's horns give the pattern everyone at sea learns. 7 short, 1 long. It is a sensible code. It says be awake. It says this is not for practice unless we say so. The sound rolled out over an ocean so black it felt like the world had been erased past the rail. I stood near the aft elevators, not intending anything, and watched the numbers rise and fall as if each car were taking small, careful breaths. The panel never showed M again. It didn't need to. Sometimes you only have to be given the room once and then you carry it with you. Sometimes you count. Sometimes you keep your voice low, the way you would in a chapel or a hospital or a hallway, pressed right up against the side of a very large thing that could decide you are as soluble as sugar. I slept better the following night. Not well, but better. In the morning, I mailed the cork home inside a postcard addressed to myself. It reached my house a month later. The envelope was damp at the bottom, like it had been held against someone's palm a long, long time. They put me on the Riviera Crown for a westbound crossing, Lisbon to somewhere the maps lost their nerve and called just open ocean, then on to New York, if the weather kept its temper. I did my set each night in the small theater where the wallpaper insisted on being cheerful. People laughed in the way people do when they want to prove they're brave in public. Afterward, I would walk, because I've spent 20 years learning that ships speak their clearest after midnight. Out there, the sea was a sheet of black glass with the world's lights turned face down. The windows returned me to myself and then took me away again, the way a patient mirror does when it's seen too many faces. The hum of the engines set a polite rhythm in my bones. If it faltered, I imagined my skeleton would notice first. On the second dead calm night, I wandered up to the observation lounge, the one they close at 11 and pretend is empty after. It was the color of expensive tea and had windows that ran like a cracked crown around the bow. Zofia was in there wiping tables to a shine I could see my guilt in. She managed that room with the brisk kindness of a nurse. "You want to see it?" she said without looking up, as if we were continuing a conversation I hadn't agreed to have. "See what?" I asked. She pressed her cloth into the glass, then stepped back so I could inherit the smudge. "Our companion," she said, like it was a pet that might need walking. "I have learned not to drag surprises into the light too quickly." We stood side by side with the ship's nose hushing the sea. There was nothing outside but a suggestion of texture, where the bow wake lifted and fell. The horizon had packed up and gone. I said deadpan, that if she was trying to sell me a miracle, I wanted a money-back guarantee. Zofia made a small sound that could have been a laugh if it had more calories. "Not there," she said, nodding at the black. "There," and she tilted her chin at the windows themselves. The glass handed me back the lounge. Chairs turned like faithful dogs toward the dark. In that reflection, just off my shoulder, lines of smaller lights moved where our rail should have been. A procession of warm dots sliding along as if another deck lay a breath away outside. When I turned to catch them in the real world, they were gone, and when I turned back, the glass had put them back, patient as breath on a cold day. I told Zofia the thing you tell people when you don't want to make a theory too fast. "You've got a phantom circuit in here," I said. "The LEDs under the valance, maybe they're bouncing their ghosts in the panes." She showed me the dimmer off and the breakers tagged out. All correct, all good housekeeping. We stood with the ship, shivering the smallest possible shiver as water curled from its shoulders. And in the window, the second set of lights slid on, a neat underline beside our own. Zofia said, "They come on the long nights, only on crossings, not when there is land to point at. Everybody sees them different. I see the rail, some see a whole deck. The officers say it's the curve of the glass." She smoothed a fleck of lint off her towel. "I don't argue with officers. I just keep count. 8 bells is when it's closest. 8 bells marks the end of a watch. 4 o'clock, a reasonable time for the brain to make you a small gift it thinks you need." I told myself that. I went back twice more that night, before and after the room service staff wheeled sandwiches through. Once the glass showed only my long, doubtful face and the gray leopard of the sea beyond. Once the other lights walked past so near I could have put my palm to the window and matched them, finger to finger. In the reflection, a man crossing frame carried a tray of tea with cups like moons. I turned to greet him and found I was alone, with my own breath, which had fogged an oval on the glass I hadn't noticed making. You can live beside a rumor if you keep it fed with better ones. The next day I asked around. The bridge would humor me to a point. Entertainers are pets and distractions. An officer with a posture like a metronome told me there had been no AIS contacts within 60 miles all night. The radio room was its usual drought of interest. Even the night fishermen off the islands had taken the week off. The bosun, a square man named Mateo, who measured rope with his thumbs as if counting prayer beads, told me in the crew bar that sometimes the sea remembers. Other ships, not in front of people, he added, which made me like him. Don't look for it, he said. That's not a superstition, that's work. People who look for it start seeing it in everything. In their plates, in their cabin mirrors. He pinched salt between finger and thumb and dropped it into his beer as if to keep the ocean honest. I did not look for it that evening. I walked the lower promenade where the lifeboats sleep, and the wind comes in under the rail with a small, cat's persistence. The deck lights made cones in the mist, warm little tents. Halfway forward I heard, very distinctly, a bell across the water. 2 clear strikes, the second a shade longer. The sound traveling a path only bells know. We were alone for 40 miles in any direction. It could have been one of ours, I told myself, letting a word stand in for a fact. The sound came again, fewer molecules this time, as if shy. I looked out and saw only the endless black, slick as a shuttered eye. When I looked back down, the walkway had 4 wet marks equidistant across it, as if someone had lifted the edge of a ladder and forgotten to lift each foot. After my show, I found Zofia tying down the lounge's curtains against the night. She watched me in the window watching us, and then she gestured me forward like a magician letting a child check the hat. The reflection gave us the room as it was, and beside it a second with less patience for comfort. Chairs turned a few degrees, off our angle, a sign on a side table that didn't exist here, black letters on white card, no drinks on the sill. Our lounge had no sills, only a clean run of glass. The other room had metal frames. A woman in the other room, hair pinned too severely for this decade, was standing at her window and touching the glass the way you touch a sore tooth. When she glanced up, not at us but over our shoulders at whatever her version of us was, her mouth loosened as if to speak, and then she was not there. My own hand had lifted without permission and found the glass. It was cold and dry and real. I pulled it back like a child from a stove. Sometimes the sea plays a trick on the light and gives you a city you don't have, floating like a mirage. Fata Morgana, the textbooks say. Towers become ships, become towers again. But cities don't move a beam alongside you, keeping your pace like someone who has matched your stride and is pretending they didn't. At 3:45, coffee-wired and rational enough to see animals in clouds and stop there, I felt the ship gently shift. Not a turn, an adjustment, like a dog making room on a couch for another dog. The hum ran a step lower for a breath. The deckhouse clicked in a way that said we had acknowledged something we promised we didn't see. At 4, 8 bells sounded, from our own bridge, the formal music of duty changing hands. And in the glass, the warmth of the other rail drew so near that the reflections braided, and I could not separate our lights from theirs. I slept a little that morning, in the way people fall against sleep rather than into it. Dreams were busy with halls and rails and a woman making her mouth ready for speech that never arrived. At noon, the captain gave us the usual talk about swell and headwinds and a low that wanted our attention 2 days hence. He did not mention company because no one on a mic ever does. After lunch, I walked forward to the mooring deck door. It was closed, dogged shut, stamped on the metal in letters that would survive a war. I put my ear to it, an old theater trick, and heard the ship's long body saying what it always says to itself. And underneath that, small metal calls like tiny silver spoons chiming in a drawer when someone passes. The crew schematic on the bulkhead showed an outdated layout, A raised platform that wasn't there anymore. A ghost plan. Somebody had traced a curved line in pencil over it, then rubbed it out, then traced it again, darker. It marked a radius, the one you keep clear when a mooring line is under load. The sign beneath said snapback zone in letters that did not want to make friends. That night the windows gave us both rooms right away. No coyness left. People had been in our lounge earlier, for sunset, leaving the faint ghost of fingerprints, and those prints now sat like protest notes over the superimposed rail of somewhere else. I could smell coffee that wasn't ours, darker, oiled, the way older machines make it. And cigar, faint, which is forbidden on this ship and every ship like it now. Zofia, who had allergies to nonsense and floral perfume, rubbed her nose. "They'll come for the after-midnight dance class," she said, matter-of-fact as a cashier. "They never get it right. It's a samba in theirs when ours is a waltz." Then she left me to it as if it was my turn on watch. I stood with the gentleman respect we give to things that could, with a change of mind, erase us. And I thought of Mateo counting rope, of the officer naming a clear horizon, of how many people I had taught to laugh into the dark so it didn't learn their names. At 4 I heard the bell again. Not from the black this time, but from the glass, which is worse because you expect silence from something built to keep sound out and reflections in. The tone arrived and left clean as bone. In the reflection, a man in a white jacket without our logo moved quickly along the far rail, head down in the efficient way of staff who have been made to do something twice. As he passed my patch of glass, he lifted a hand, not a wave, a small signal that said, "I see you and will not make trouble for you if you return the favor." I lifted my hand in the same nondescript half gesture. The bell stopped. The other lights drew back, their lambent seams unknotting from ours, and there was only our patient lounge and the black beyond, newly depthless, as if someone had scooped an inch out of it while we weren't watching. In the morning, the sea was a friendly mess, white here and there where yesterday had been slate. People came to breakfast arguing about trivia answers and the price of laundry. I told my story at lunch to a circle of regulars who have followed me across more water than is sensible. They wanted a punchline because we are conditioned to need the light on a timer. I told them there wasn't one, that sometimes a ship is alone and sometimes it isn't, and you can live just fine with that. After the show, outside my cabin, taped at shoulder height to the wall where a steward would leave a towel animal, was a folded bar coaster I had never seen. Inside, in tidy, careful block letters, it said, "Keep the curtains closed on long nights. Let them pass by." No signature. The coaster was from a line that folded decades ago. The paper had a tide mark along the bottom, as if someone had carried it in wet hands and finally set it down when they were sure I would see it.